Welcome to the Republican Professor. This morning we have with us a special guest, Darren Guerra.
Hello.
Good to have you, Darren. Thanks
Good
for
to
being
be
here.
here. Good to be here, Lucas.
You're looking good.
Hey.
Darren, I'm so happy that I pronounced your last name correctly, and you have shared just before we started recording a humorous anecdote of being correct. Being corrected on how to say your own last name.
Yeah, it happens.
I'm still laughing about that.
In California, the Spanish pronunciation of Guerra, that's how the Spanish would pronounce it, which is fine, but it happens to be Italian, and in Italy, it's Gu-air-rah. Each vowel gets pronounced in Italian, whereas blended in Spanish, and so. I pronounced my name to this secretary at Claremont, where I was in graduate school, and she's like, "Oh, you mean Guerra?" Like she was trying to correct me, like I didn't have consciousness to pronounce my name correctly. And I was like, "No, it's Gu-air-rah." And my wife, when we were had the good fortune to be in Italy a few years ago, people were pronouncing it correctly because they just naturally did. And she's like, "Oh, okay, I'm getting she's understanding the full, like even the way I pronounce it, slightly Americanized, but.
Oh, okay. That's funny. Gu-air-rah.
Gu-air-rah, that's right. And you got to have the hand in the, yes.
Gu-air-rah. Yeah. Okay, cool. Now, actually, that's funny thing is I knew how to say it, but I always mess up your first name. It's Dar?
Yeah, that one's Scottish.
Darren.
It's Scottish in origin. Yeah. So Darren's hard in English.
Darren. Okay, sorry.
It's hard to translate across like that. And
well, your last name is spelled Guerra, and your first name is Darren.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in California, I like to roll the R's in difference. It's Darren.
Oh wow, there you go.
I just.
Well, you've been teaching political science now at Biola University for what is it, 2 decades now? How long have you been there?
Well, no, let's see. 2013, I moved from Vanguard University, where I was for 8 years, I suppose, and then I moved to Biola. So I'm approaching 2 decades of teaching in general full time. But
okay.
I, did adjunct work before that. So I've been teaching probably since the late 90s.
Wow. So you're now in the political science department at Biola University. And does that mean that you're a Christian?
It should.
We have to check, Darren.
Yes.
We have to check.
Well, we have to sign a statement of faith.
That's right.
It's pretty robust, but
yeah, that's right. It's very specific. There's lots of things in there.
That's right. And you're a student of constitutional law. People can do a lot of things with language and the way they want to. And so
right.
That's a challenge. But I believe I interpret those statements of faith in an orthodox vein. So
okay.
Orthodox.
There you go. How's the political science department at Biola doing?
Good, great. I mean, now that we're kind of through the COVID era is waning. If you measure it by enrollments, we're back up to kind of pre-COVID levels, and we find that. We have a kind of coherent, robust, and unique maybe way of approaching political science that seems to attract students. And we've been having success placing students out of Biola in important areas. We've had students in the White House. We have a student on the 9th Circuit now. We have students.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, we have. So
you mean on the 9th Circuit in terms of as a clerk?
A clerk, yeah.
Oh,
a clerk.
We haven't quite gotten. That's quite an accomplishment there, Darren.
Yeah, right.
Graduate from Biola and get right on the federal bench.
That's right. That's right. They went straight. Yeah,
that is quite
you
an
don't even need
accomplishment.
law school.
No, that's
What's
that's a
that?
big that's quite an accomplishment to get one of those clerkships. They
It
don't just
is-
hand that out like candy.
No, they don't.
So was it a
These were.
Biola student that leaked the Roe versus Wade document, you think, at the Supreme Court?
I sure hope not.
I saw
we don't have one on the Supreme Court, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I saw a story this morning. Daniel Ellsberg, I guess, is chirping at NPR. He's the guy that leaked the Pentagon Papers, as you may recall, and
Yes.
mainly saying that for the listeners that are trying to recall who the heck this guy is. And
Right.
he said that it's really important what happened at the Supreme Court leaking that confidential memo, because we have to keep government accountable.
Yeah.
So Supreme Court deliberations in a sensitive case involving two parties in a case or controversy, same thing as war in Vietnam with the executive department.
Yeah, right. I mean, the level of I don't know. I'm trying to be kind. Maybe I shouldn't, but just the lack of awareness of the basic foundations of our system is staggering. I mean, the fact that you might want or require secret deliberations for a branch that's supposed to be shielded from the raw politics of public opinion, as opposed to the elected executive branch or the elected members of Congress who are supposed to be somewhat subject to popular opinion. It's clear that regarding the court, the left and the Democratic Party have for, 70, 80 years been undermining the basic foundations of the Constitution as being something that's supposed to be above, but influenced by, but still above raw democratic exertions of popular will. I mean,
right.
Anyways, we could talk about that later, but
sure. No, I'm fully on board with that. And I feel like the ironic thing about Ellsberg's story there on NPR is that if Roe versus Wade was overturned, then the people could vote on it.
Right.
That's the most ironic thing about what he said, is that he's actually afraid that it will be subject to the democratic process in an ordinary way, not in court.
Exactly. What's interesting, I've seen numerous, and I was just reading one this morning from a liberal, and how, I don't know what this person would describe themselves, but your point is well made. It's like, basically, there's a basic willfulness at the bottom of all these critiques. When the court does, when it stays on our reservation, whatever the Zeitgeist is telling us it needs to be affirming right now, we're good with it. When it dares to question what we sense the Zeitgeist is telling us to affirm, then it's undermining democracy. It's doing all these horrible things.
Yeah, that's right.
Consistent principle or thread that you can weave through that. It's basic willfulness.
Yep.
Put it in. We can.
So the source of law is not the people; it's some kind of zeitgeist.
Yeah, weird. Exactly.
And how do you know what that is?
You just feel it.
Anyway,
that's where C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man is really helpful. It's the rule of a randomized nature over man. It's not man over nature. But anyway.
Someone's listening to this in the future, they don't know what zeitgeist means. How would you define that term for them? The
spirit of the times, an unspoken sense of directing. I mean, and it manifests, as you know, in various ways. But
yeah,
it could be history. It could be just whatever. That's what people say. Oh, get up to date with history.
What if someone was asking, why are we talking about German terms? What would you say?
I would say that German philosophy has probably unduly influenced most of the American academy, and I would refer people to a lot of the You know, a good place to start might be The Closing of the American Mind by Alan Bloom. There's a lot of good things written on the influence of the German Academy through people like Woodrow Wilson, John Dewey, etc., that were basically educated in Germany and imported their ideas into the American Academy.
Yeah. What kind of courses do you teach there at Biola? Do you teach, like if someone wanted to know what Zeitgeist meant, do you teach a course that covers that?
Yeah, in a way. What we've done.
And what's Christianity have to do with politics? I mean,
Yeah.
why are these innocent Christians at Biola, why do they have to learn about politics? That seems like such a non-Christian thing.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, I like how Peter Lightheart put it, and I'm not going to quote him exactly, but he says basically, every time one takes communion, that's a fundamentally political act because one is pledging one's life and one's soul to something higher than themselves.
Ooh.
And
that's insightful.
At the very root of things, that's what we do when we take communion. And that's fundamentally political because the state wants that allegiance. It has ever since the beginning.
Yeah.
That's what early Christians were resisting when they asked just a pinch of incense, right? Just a pinch to the Roman gods. And Polycarp said, not even a pinch, not even a pinch.
Wow.
So anyways, why do we teach? So I mean, our program, I think, is unique in that some years ago, we decided, hey, we're going to create a core within our major. So every student has to take a course called Foundations of American Politics, a course that we created out of whole cloth called Citizenship, Virtue, and Politics, and a course on world politics, which gets into the international relations realm. And that kind of course of three, we felt would give students a grounding, a foundation, and in kind of the breadth of the discipline. And I happen to teach the Citizenship, Virtue, and Politics course, and that's where we might get into the term like Zeitgeist. But my colleague Caller teaches kind of the upper division political philosophy, and I teach this kind of class. And I tell students, and they really are, I tell them, I'm assuming that you guys are all not uncritical, but that you don't realize it, but you're basically cultural relativists, probably. That's been my experience over the years. And so
that's scary. That's very scary to me.
Well, it's not as bad as you think, because they don't want to be, but they to like problems which I can describe. But I tell them, I assume you're cultural relativists because that's what you breathe, and it's on the TV you watch, it's in the music you listen to, it's in the movies you watch, it's everywhere. And so I assume you've imbibed, and sadly it's probably in the churches. So I assume that. And so this course is not going to be an even-handed look at a walk through the history of philosophy. It's going to be an attempt in a semester to give you what might be a Christian approach to politics. And we're going to root that in the Christian virtues. And so, but in doing so, we have to contrast it with something. So we'll talk a little bit about Nietzsche and Hegel and Kant. We don't go in depth. They don't come out of it knowing them really well, but they're essentially foils for the contrast to what would politics rooted in Christian virtue look like. And so, and then we walk through the virtues, and we can talk more about that, but that's kind of where the term zeitgeist might come up.
And that's part of the core called the Citizenship, Virtue, and Politics course?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I just want to make sure I got the names right. The other one is called Foundations of American Politics, right? That's
Yeah.
taught by, is that taught by Waller?
Yes.
Okay. And then there's a world politics one, and that's taught by who teaches that?
Tim Melosh at this point. Yes.
What's his name again?
Melosh.
Malash.
Losh.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a robust introduction. I like the way you put it. I liked how you said what might be an approach, a Christian approach to politics. So in other words, you're inviting dialogue with the student.
That's right.
And you're saying, I'm not going to shove this down your throat as the way, but I have thought about it quite a bit. I've read quite a bit, probably read more than you have. I know you don't put it that way, but they should be able to get that. That's kind of the point of taking a course like that.
Yeah.
That's why they're paying the big bucks, and or someone is, grandma is.
That's right. That's right.
And I mean, grandma's over there mortgaging her house over there, so you can, obviously you want someone who's taught a lot and who's thought about this and read a lot of books. And so you're saying, I think it would be irresponsible of you not to do that, like not to offer this as this is what I got. But I'm happy to dialogue with you, and
that's right.
I'm happy to not foreclose anything that you think should be considered. And
no, so, exactly, you nailed it. That's exactly what I try to do, invite them into a conversation. But early in my career, I started realizing that kind of the sterile approach of, here are different views, choose one.
It's a lot of pressure for the student.
What's that?
That's a lot of pressure for the student.
Yeah, and so I like how you.
Well, how do I know which one to choose? I mean, like, you're the professional.
Yeah, exactly, and so especially now, other courses I might take a slightly, it's going to vary by course, but I felt when our whole culture, essentially, they get almost 24/7 cultural relativism in some form.
Yeah.
And if we can't do one course that pushes against that pretty robustly for a semester, then something's wrong. I mean, you got it. That's where we kind of start with a couple readings that argue. Peter Kreeft is one. He's the one that comes to mind right now, about how the problem in Western culture is a loss of objective morality. There's nothing rooting our ideas, our systems, our institutions, our churches. It's just floating. It's floating along on kind of raw human will. And so we introduced this problem, and then we move to I think a good text for addressing this is C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man. So we read that whole thing. I mean, it's not long, as you know, but we spend a good talking through the arguments there. And that's where the conversation, I think, really begins. Because I'm even this semester, I had students, because in contemporary terms, like objective moral value, like you see students, some of them are like, hey, that makes sense. Others are like, whoa, wait a second, objective anything? Like, they're uncomfortable with that. And I remember I had a dialogue this semester with a student, and she was like, okay, so let's say someone said there's objective standards of beauty. How can we, like, there's only one view of beauty? And she was asking it sincerely. I don't think she was trying to trap me or anything, but I think in her mind, that was a big question. I said, well, no, because if there's not objective beauty, there's nothing to talk about, because everything is beauty. And by definition, if everything's beautiful, then nothing is beautiful. There has to be a thing called beauty that has defined limits. Otherwise, there's nothing to talk about. But once you accept the premise that, hey, beauty is a thing and it has defined limits, even if I don't know where those limits are, then we can have some wonderful, rich discussions on, is this painting beautiful? Is this play or song beautiful? Is anything beautiful? Those can be great conversations to have. but they can't take place if everything is beautiful. If beauty is only in the eye of the beholder, there's nothing to talk about. And you could see it like click. She's like, oh, okay, I get that. And we moved on, from there. But those are the kind of the fun conversations that come out of just, hey, is there objective morality? What's the case for it? Why does it matter? And I mean, that's the main thing that we try to get set right away in that class is like, if you don't buy objective morality, then we're back. I have them read the snippet of book 1 of Plato's Republic, where Plato and Thrasymachus are debating what justice is, because students love justice these days. Oh, everything's about justice, right? So let's start with, what is justice? That's what Plato asked, 300 BC. Well, Thrasymachus says it's the will of the strong, or the advantage of the stronger, depending on what translation you're using. And so we start there, and I say, hey, this is not new. This is Thrasymachus in 300 BC arguing that justice doesn't really exist because it's just whatever the strong say it is. And Socrates rejects that. And we don't read the whole Republic in that class, but I want them to see, as Christians, here's non-Christians, Socrates and Thrasymachus, putting their finger on the problem of not having an objective moral order. And Thrasymachus basically says there is no objective moral order. It's just whatever the strong say it is. And Socrates is like, well, let's wait a second. And so anyways, that's
get
into that.
That's great. Where did you get the idea to use book 1? I smell Harry Jaffa in there somewhere. Were you a student of his?
Not directly, but very much indirectly.
Okay.
I suppose it probably has to be the Jaffa influence in some way. It's certainly, once I read Harry Jaffa, I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely read the Republic before I read Jaffa, but reading him, I'm like, oh, that connection's definitely there. I mean, it's you can't miss it, right? He's right about that. I
think he is right about that too. I thought that was a sufficient reason to have Glenn Elmers come on and talk about his book for 2 hours, which he did.
I look forward to listening to that, because I read the book, and Glenn and I were students at the same time. We overlapped a little bit. We didn't know each other super well, but.
Well, I thought he did a fine job on that book, and it's a careful book.
Yes.
One might not agree with every little jot and tittle of what he said. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I disagree with per se. There might have been something, but he put so much work into that. He spent so much time in the archives, the Harry Jaffa archives, letters, and the guy wrote, so many letters. He left such a paper trail, a rich, unending supply of archival materials for librarians. And it's all there, and Glenn went through it. So, and Glenn's own letters are in there somewhere, because he
he wrote to Jaffa.
He got a letter back too, a couple letters. He got phone calls, I think. Maybe I'm missing.
Glenn's book is good. I already recommended it to several students. We have one student head to Hillsdale in the fall, and I was like, hey, you need to get Elmer's book, because you're heading into the Jaffa Straussian world, and you just need to know the lay of the land. So,
well, I told Glenn on that interview, I said that I had a conversation with the professor at Claremont who taught philosophy in the philosophy department. And as you know, I taught in philosophy departments for 15 years. So I was coming to Claremont from a philosophy background in philosophy departments, and these kind of turf wars on campus don't really make much sense to people who are just kind of observing, maybe. But on the campus, these kind of turf wars are a big deal to people. And anyway, this guy was my professor there at Claremont in the philosophy department, and he was a good professor. I really liked him. I think he's still around. I don't know, actually, but he taught me Aristotle, and his name is Charles Young. But he was so concerned for me. he said, I want you to be, they're Straussians. And I didn't know what a Straussian was. And so I just asked him, and you'll hear this on the Elmer's interview, this story, but I'll tell it here again. I told Dr. Young, I said, I'm sitting there in his office at Claremont, which is a house. It's a philosophy house, and it's upstairs. It's like in this house, in this bedroom, and this guy has a really great office. And I'm sitting there, I'm a little intimidated because he's got books and papers everywhere. And, he's obviously got tenure and he knows a lot. And what do I know? I mean, I just got off of 2 hours of driving, and I'm like, I'm pretty tired. And he's telling me, you don't understand. They're Straussians. And so I say, what's a Straussian? And here's the most interesting thing. This is the whole point of the story. Is you could tell by the look on his face that he did not expect me to ask that question. And he wasn't ready to answer it. I don't think he even knew what a Straussian was. So he scrambles really quick, and he's panicking a little bit, and he pulls up an article from the New Republic. I'm not kidding. He pulls up the New Republic, which is just a popular magazine, for college graduates, I suppose. But and there's an article on there, and I read the article, and it wasn't very helpful for me. I still didn't know what a Straussian was. So what he said was, he said, well, they approach the reading. They say that classical philosophy is still relevant, and they approach the reading of it very carefully. And I said, so in other words, it sounds exactly like the Aristotle class I just took from you. We had a whole semester on book 5 in your class of Nicomachean ethics. Anyway, it's just funny. The reason I share that story is because I want to encourage people that sometimes your professors don't quite have it all together. And if you have just an honest question, sometimes you can really throw them for a loop.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because they just expect you to have, it's like there's something in the water. It's kind of like cultural relativism. It's just kind of in the drinking fountain. And it's just kind of expected that, you're going around along with the redefinition of marriage too, right? You don't know what my third personal pronouns are too. I have to tell you, right? And I remember someone introducing themselves to me as he, him, his, or something. And I said, well, I don't know why you're telling me that, because I would only use those pronouns if you're not around.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So why are you telling me how to address you when you're not there? I don't get that. And
this was covered in my basic grammar textbook.
Besides, that's not what those words mean in English anyway. I mean, the words don't mean what you tell me they mean. They mean what it appears to do, whether you appear to me, the user, as a male or female. That's what it means in English. You can't change that. I mean, that's not going to change
the role of an objective moral order. Language either reflects the objective moral order, or it deviates from it, or rebels against it, which this whole pronoun stuff is like, no, we don't want to accept the basic
there's like
empirical, natural reality that we see before us.
Right. Yeah. And it's just a really odd cultural thing going on. I love that you're doing the cultural relativism, getting them to think about that, because you see it on LinkedIn, for example. Like I was just on LinkedIn this morning, and I see my former students, and they have the pronouns up there. And these are students I love. I mean, they're not, I have no ill will or anything. It's just odd that they feel like, you can tell they feel like they have to do it, even though they don't. Because I already knew you were he, him. I mean, the fact that you're telling me it, you might as well tell me by the way, I'm human.
Yes.
That's my species. And
I'm not a Martian.
I'm alive. I'm not dead. That's another aspect of me. And it's like, well, why do you feel like you have to tell? I'm clothed.
Yes. I hope so. Anyways,
Well, and so it might be a little confusing to younger people who don't know the way it used to be. And even on LinkedIn, you can see some have the pronouns, some don't. And seems like it's only people that have these contract jobs that have it, or maybe are W-2s of woke kind of like university type places.
it's a tough situation, I think, for people. And so I give some grace. I mean, I'm grateful that I have a job where I can pretty much speak my mind, but I understand if, you can't, you're trying to provide for yourself or your family or what have you. And the powers that be tell you formally or informally, you have to kind of play along. Well, then you have several choices are pretty limited. You either play along, you either just say, I'm not going to, and lose your job. And, or, well, I guess the first one would be you just capitulate. Second one is you just quit. The third one is you stay in your job and you be subversive from the inside. Those are the three options. And if you don't want to capitulate, then you have to choose the other two. And that's going to depend on the type of person. Fine with either. Some people just can't put up with it. And I kudos to them, then quit and play along. But I look at the old Soviet Union. Sometimes you just didn't have that option. Like you can go to the gulag, or you could try to undermine the whole project from the inside. I think those are two viable options. But the other option is just to capitulate, and I don't think it's a viable option. But anyways,
I keep waiting for some of because I follow institutions on LinkedIn.
Oh, okay.
And, like LMU and Pepperdine. And I think I follow Biola. And
their pronouns.
Just basically any institution I had any kind of relationship with, either as a student, faculty, or graduate assistant, something like that. And I'm waiting for the institutions to have pronouns, because those are legal persons under the law.
That's right.
And just waiting for LMU to say pronouns it's.
Yeah, right. I mean,
as if I don't know it's an it.
Right. Well, that's the thing. It's like with all this absurdity, it is absurd. But once you kind of detethered the link to like reason and an order, like the stuff that we're like laughing about now, in 5 years or sooner, I could see institutions doing that, and we'd be like 5 years ago we thought that was crazy. Like 5 years ago we thought humans doing that, like individuals doing that, was crazy. And like each 5 year increment or so, it gets crazier and crazier. And it's like, well, yeah, because there really is nothing restraining the human imagination or the human will from doing anything that's crazy, that's crazy by any objective measure. If once you let go of any objective measure, then things do start to go it literally is insane. Like, it's not a hyperbole. It's like, it's crazy. It's not crazy, is not comporting with the rational, objective, moral order that does exist. Once you let that go, then, hey, we'll just float wherever. There's nothing to stop you from going wherever. And that's what I try to impart to the students. Like, we are part of one big, huge social experiment right now. And I want to show you how it used to be, at least a glimpse of it. Be things called virtues that were rooted to the objective moral order, not just values. I do this little test with them. I say, okay, you guys are all products of a culture shaped by modernity and postmodernity. And modernity was big on this fact value distinction, which I know you're familiar with. But so I'd say, okay, George Washington is the first president of the United States. Fact or value? They're like, oh, fact. Sacramento is the capital of California. Oh, fact. It's rude to chew with your mouth full. It's rude to talk with your mouth full. Oh, that's a value. Like, oh, it's rude to talk too close to someone and invade their personal space. Well, that's a value. I'm like, okay, so you guys got it, right? Then I say, okay, murder is wrong. And there's like this pause, and they're like, and then one student's like, well, it's a value because you think it's wrong. Well, is that right? And another student, thankfully, will say, well, no, but murder is wrong. And then they just start debating with each other. And I just sit back and listen to it for a while. And then but it's a great way to, like, so you guys have bought into the fact value distinction. If there's any kind of moral substance
judgment made, then you're saying it's a value and it's inherently subjective. So I like Rocky Road ice cream. You like vanilla ice cream. I like to murder. You don't like to murder. Right?
Wow.
They're like, they're not comfortable with that. They don't know what to do with that. I'm like, so either murder is wrong or it's not wrong. How do we come to that conclusion? So anyways, again, it opens up the door to like a conversation. I said, it just so happens that the American founders were in a generation that didn't buy into this distinction. When they said all men are created equal, they meant that as a moral proposition that was true, not their opinion. Because Christians will say, well, I'm a Christian, I think murder is wrong, but other people don't think it's wrong.
Right.
Like,
well,
so
might be true that might be true, but it doesn't follow, therefore, that it isn't wrong.
Yeah, well,
I mean, it's I love the way you did that. I love that you're doing that at Biola University. Just to give people a little bit more background of what kind of school Biola is. I think you have to be a Christian to go there. Is that right?
Students have, you have to have some kind of statement of faith.
So these are Christians, is what I'm saying. These are Christians. Yes. They're all Christians in the classroom.
Yes.
And they're going back and forth about whether it's true that murder is wrong.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at, people. That's where we're at.
Yeah, no, it is where we're at. Now, to be fair to the students, they don't in their mind think it's right. They just don't know what ground do they stand on to tell someone else that it's wrong. They don't have that because.
So you think they're having a hard time with the evidence for it? Like what do they use as evidence that murder is wrong?
I think they have, they have a hard time with what they view. They've been taught, so in the postmodern manifestation of modernity, the rejection of modernity, the moderns would have said, yeah, murder is wrong, get over it, get on with it. There's other problems there, but postmoderns are like, well, how do we know? Like, who are we to impose our values on other people? And where today's students are coming from, like, so they'll say in the class, they'll say, well, yeah, I'm a Christian, I believe it's wrong, but who am I to tell someone else it's not? If they don't believe it's wrong, then it's not wrong. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
So it's like flavors then.
Well, if that's where the students are, and you're putting your finger on that, and you know where the students are because you're a professor and this is what you do for a living, you are doing what's appropriate in that circumstance. You have to find a pedagogical technique that allows the students to feel like they're allowed to voice their true opinion in the classroom, so that people can talk about it and we can all come together and examine it in a state of relative rest and digest as far as the nervous system goes. Because if people are in a state of fight or flight, the learning is compromised. You can't learn very well for the long term in that type of state. I don't think it's helpful if you're responding to an emergency. But in terms of a long form formation of Christian scholars and engagement, Christian activism, whatever these business people, whatever they're going to do, be coaches, teachers, mechanics, Christian pilots, whatever, they're going to have to wrestle with these questions for themselves. And that's what I love about how you just raise the question in that way and get the students talking to each other. Is there ever does it ever get uncomfortable in the classroom then? Or do you think it's helpful sometimes for people to really have it out in the classroom?
Yeah, and I haven't had them. Hopefully, I'm assuming. Maybe I assume
these are big issues. I mean, murder is wrong. That's kind of a big issue. It's not like a small thing.
Yeah. Well, I think they know I'm using it as a device, but it's a question. It's like, if you can't defend that claim, what claims can you defend? You know?
Yeah.
And if they are really if that question pushes them to the position like, well, I think it's wrong, and think it's wrong, but non-Christians, they might not think it's wrong. I'm like, well, then
what I love about that is it maps exactly on to some of our most famous debates and times in American political history. For example, slavery.
yes,
Because there were Christians on both sides of that issue.
yes,
There were Christians in that classroom, so to speak, as
yes,
our professor Abraham Lincoln
that's right.
said, well, I mean, it's either right or it's wrong, and we can be pro-choice, which is the status quo, and make it just a value thing, and you do you, Southerners, you do you. And
Yeah,
but
right.
if slavery is really wrong, it's similar to the murder issue.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that what I love that you made that connection. That that's the next step in the class. We start out.
Oh, okay.
Cool. No, but I'm kind of blending two classes now, American government and the virtue class, but they map on each other. But that's the next step. Like when we look at in the American government class, we'll start with the Plato and the murder question, the fact value things. Like, well, for instance, I go right to slavery. Like, let's look at Douglas and Lincoln, right? Douglas was the pro-choice position there. Let people decide.
Douglas was, right?
Humans or not, and Lincoln was anti-choice on the issue of slavery. And they're uncomfortable with that phrasing as well. I'm like, well, let's look at it. What was their argument, Because they haven't, and I give a brief, we don't have time in the class to read in detail the Lincoln Douglas debates. I give them a brief kind of synopsis, but it's kind of give them episodes of American history of where these fundamental questions, slavery. We talked briefly about not euthanasia, but eugenics, right? The Buck v. Bell, where the Supreme Court says 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. Like, this is, do we not know that eugenics is wrong? And then we go to the civil rights movement. We read King's letter from a Birmingham jail, and he roots it nicely in the natural law tradition, and unjust law is no law at all. And I said, well, we have a contemporary debate on abortion, oddly enough, that's in today. It seems like the same issue as Douglas are debating, and these same issues, they keep popping up. What does a human being and what rights do they have under the law? Anyways, it's fun because students, I don't think, have thought about these things, and so it's fun just kind of throwing it out there and seeing what happens.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me that Christians are 20 years old, been around for 2 decades, kicking out of the womb, and they weigh anywhere from 150 pounds on up, sometimes a little bit less. In other words, they're bipedal, large mammals with big brains, and they've been around for almost 2 decades, and they're just now thinking about this. And we have a situation in America where I don't know why we're not getting this stuff to kids earlier. I think they can handle it at 13. I don't know why. I'm sure that there's 13, 14-year-olds thinking about this. I don't know why we wait so long. But you're doing a great job there. I'm so happy you're doing it. Can I ask you, though, how do you stay sane? Because I'm sure that someone's listening to this in the future and they're thinking, gosh, he seems really calm. And he teaches this stuff, and he teaches politics. And, thank God that the Lord is coming back at some point, but we might die before then, and we're kind of stuck down here with all this politics crap. How do you stay sane, and how do you feel like you're moving forward in life?
Yeah, well, no, that's a good question. I think part of it's kind of just studying, what you study and I study, like, and the way we study it is through with a historical perspective. Like, history is a great moderator, I think, because you're like, I tell students, like,
the Civil War, like you guys think everybody's talking about how divisive things are and things are horrible. Americans were killing each other en masse, 150 years ago. So things are really bad. I'm not going to downplay it, but let's just put things in perspective, right?
Yeah. Right.
We're not yet there. People are raising the alarms and hearing that, but we're not there. So one thing, history kind of, and the more you read history, like things have been really horrible, and I want them to get there again. So there's things we need to do to not get there.
Yeah.
Certainly, also as a Christian, we're called. I guess one of the things God has wrestled with me on is I'm not in control, nor will I be anytime soon. And I know that's a very Christian thing to say, but it's true when you really think about it. I'm not in control. And and not being in control, what we're called to do is stand in the gap. We're called to do our duty where God has put us at this point in time. And at this point in time, He's called me to be a husband and a father and a professor at a college. And I'm just going to do my part and let the chips fall where they may. Like I'm not the president. I'm not the Supreme Court justice. I'm not the majority leader of the Senate. I'm not the CEO of Starbucks or whatever. I'm a professor at a university. I have kids to parent. I have a wife to support, and I'm going to do that the best I can and leave the rest. I hope other people, like-minded people, play their role. I love this studying the Civil War. You can only take care of the person in front of you, and you got to trust the guys on either side to do their job. And if you don't have that trust, then the whole thing falls apart. And I think that works socially as well. I've just got to trust that other people are doing what they got to do, and I'll try to support them as best I can. So I guess in that way, like historically, things could be worse, and my role is just to do my job and do my duty. And again, teaching the virtues with the students.
Can you rattle off some of those virtues so people have a handle on what that is?
The 4 cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, courage, temperance or moderation. And I draw them on the board. They're concentric, or not concentric, like a Venn diagram. They all overlap and support each other, right? Prudence involves seeing things. It's an intellectual virtue. It involves seeing things clearly. And it kind of helps govern the others. If you don't see things clearly, you're not going to be able to make the right judgment at the right time in the right way. But at the same time, you can't, once you make the judgment, you need to be able to act. But you need to act moderately. You can't overact. You can't underact. You need to act in the right way at the right time, in the right manner, for the right reason. But what do you act towards? You act towards dispensing justice. Well, what's the just thing to do? Well, justice is not just some thin thing that college professors at Cal State pronounce upon. Justice is a very complex thing. You have duty to God. You have duties to the older literature would talk about you have pious obligations to your family and to your country. Those are obligations you incur the moment you're born. How do you repay those obligations to your family and your country? By enacting a level of piety or respect that drives your actions. That's just, right? How do you act justly towards other people? How does society treat people justly? Like, justice is a multifaceted thing. So temperance, justice. Well, and then lastly, you need to have the courage. Once you know what to do, justice informs the what also. Temperance helps you moderate your actions. Courage underwrites all of this by allowing you to actually act to do it. Like, just knowing what to do isn't enough. You have to have the courage to actually do it, right? And so those 4 cardinal virtues, which means hinge virtues, everything hinges on those 4 acting in concert. The cardinal virtues have to be employed in a way that allow us to act rightly. And we read several essays. I like to link it to historic, like how did Alan Gelzo has a wonderful essay on prudence in Lincoln's statesmanship.
And we read, oh, well, how did Lincoln act prudently? How did he discern the right thing to do and how to do it? And how did he avoid the excesses of the abolition movement and the excesses of the pro-choice movement? Like, how did he navigate this very difficult situation? He did it through the virtue of prudence and employing justice and courage and temperance.
What was the name of the author for that?
Alan Gelzo.
Is that a book?
It's an essay. I could send it to you.
Okay.
Gelzo's a prominent author in the Civil War literature. He's a Lincoln scholar. And
how do you spell the last name?
Oh, Guelzo.
Okay.
So
it's not Guelzo.
Yeah. No, I think it's. I hesitate to guess, but I think it's some Germanic extract of some sort. But I don't know.
Do the students connect with Lincoln? Do they like him? Do they care? Do they not care? Okay.
Yeah, vast majority, I think, have not been corrupted on that one. Like, Lincoln's still like a gold standard.
Oh.
We'll see in another 15, 20 years with the 1619 project, et cetera, that they can kind of tear him down. But it's hard to do that. So
I'd like to ask you another question about, because I'm coming from the philosophy department, and I remember what it was like to be a philosophy student at Biola, at least for me. I wasn't that interested in politics at the time. I was kind of I had my head in the clouds, as Aristophanes might have said to me if I was there with him. He might have made fun of me. But I remember Paul Rood. I met Paul there.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul, I don't know how this, it might have been when I was teaching there, actually. I think I might have been teaching in the philosophy. I can't remember, but it was 05, 06-ish.
okay.
And 05, I was a student. 06, I was faculty there. And I see, if I was talking to Paul, I must have been faculty, because I was hanging out in the bullpen there with the adjuncts. But either way, Paul was the one that reached out to me as a philosophy student and philosophy future faculty. And I remember I think it was February, and it was Lincoln's birthday. And Paul reached out to me and he said, hey, do you want to do something for Lincoln's birthday in the chapel? You want to help me plan it? And I remember thinking, how does this help me understand metaphysics, epistemology? I mean, this is just the kind of the mentality I was in at the time.
Yeah.
I was thinking, how is this going to advance my philosophy career? I'm embarrassed to say this, to be honest with you, because I really am patriotic. I served in the military.
Yeah.
I grew up, Second Amendment, loving the Constitution. Went to Summit Ministries as a kid, Dr. Dobson, the whole 9 yards. My grandpa knew Ronald Reagan. So, I don't know why I had this reaction. It's almost like the philosophy department unwittingly had this effect on me. I'm not saying it was by design, but I went along with what Paul was doing because he was so persuasive.
Nice.
And we did this event in the chapel for Lincoln's birthday. We read stuff from Lincoln. And I remember thinking, I had such an emotional reaction to it. I was ashamed. I was ashamed that it wasn't a bigger deal on campus.
Yeah.
I was ashamed of our campus.
No.
And I was ashamed for myself because, and I just remember admiring Paul at that moment. I thought, whoa, I'm missing something here. And that was the beginning of my looking into Claremont. Nice. And I remember Waller was going there, and Waller and I shared the bullpen there in adjunct. And it was Waller that brought me to campus the first time. I sat in on a class with him, with Dr. Bissett. And so Bissett, a little bit of my backstory, but it was Paul Rood that really got me thinking about the mapping on of the moral theory to American politics, and how does that actually go, and how did it go? Yeah. So my question to you is, what do you say to people that seem to just reduce politics to morality, to ethics? I saw this with the reaction to Trump a lot. Like among some of my philosophy colleagues, it seemed like the only thing that they had that was by way of American politics commentary was just an analysis of his character and his a moral analysis, like like it was ethics 101, intro to like American politics is just intro to ethics. And I thought they're missing so much. I don't know why they only see that one angle. I guess it's like a surgeon who is highly trained in surgery, and so if there's a problem, they just look for the knife, and that's just what they know, and they don't know, they don't have a fuller picture. But what you've mentioned a lot about morality and philosophy and ethics here, but what else are we missing about politics? How is it a fuller discipline than just ethics?
No, I think, well, I mean, I think it gets something right, but your question is right on point. Politics is, in a way, an applied ethics, but it's not just that. In applying it in the real world, I mean, Aristotle says politics is how we ought to order our lives together, right? So politics is about ordering our lives together, but there's an oughtness, right? Right way and a wrong way. And so the ethics gets to the oughtness of it, right? There's a right way and a wrong way. And to tie in Lincoln that you were just talking about, Lincoln got the ethical dimension correct, right? Slavery is a grave moral evil. It needs to be ended in our country. So did William Lloyd Garrison, an abolitionist, right? His position is slavery is a grave moral evil. It needs to be ended. But William Lloyd Garrison also said the Constitution is a pact with the devil. It needs to be ended. Slavery is such a grave evil. We need to do whatever it takes to end it, even if it means throwing off the Constitution. Lincoln, on the other hand, said, yes, slavery is a grave moral evil, but more evil would abound if we throw off this good Constitution. How can we end slavery within the confines of constitutional government? And that's what I think the people that you're talking about miss. They focus in on the ethical, moral question and give no concern to the ways, the political means necessary to implement sound moral questions. And that's what's so rich about studying the American founding, is the American founders had a fuller orbed understanding of that problem. As when we look at book one of Plato's Politics, people have been wrestling with these moral questions for ages. That's not new.
Right.
What was new in the American experience, this is where Joffa's so good. What was new in the American experiment was what kind of institutional frameworks will allow us to solve these ethical, moral questions in a way that is prudent. I mean, I don't know, that's as simple as I can put it, but, and so I think people miss that. They just get focused on, Biden said this, or Trump did this, or Obama did that. And it's all this kind of personal, it's like American Idol on speed in kind of American politics.
Right.
How will electing this person or that person help sustain our institutions in a healthy way?
Right.
And people don't want to engage in that conversation. They want to personalize everything. And
maybe they're missing there's some things they're missing in terms of details, I would say, about how institutions work, what the design actually is, what the history is, law. And it's an interesting question asking what law is compared to morality.
yes.
So that's another thing, but it's not purely a philosophical question, because law at least constitutional law, you have to get into the details somewhat to answer this question. For example, yesterday we just posted an episode on God, Guns in America by a Biola grad, Dr. Mike Austin. And he's a PhD in philosophy, attempting to discuss American politics. And he took the gun control debate. And so there's some good things about that book, and I mentioned them in the episode, and I mentioned them when I reviewed the book online. He's got a fantastic chapter on fallacies. It's wonderful stuff for anybody looking at examples of fallacies and how to maybe teach the stuff from slogans you hear in the Second Amendment debate. But like I said in yesterday's episode that we just posted, the attempt to, for example, in that book, he does mention the Supreme Court decisions, but says hardly anything about them at all that would be helpful in the debate. In other words, to really have the constitutional law topic before us, we do need to get into the details, about, for example, who these plaintiffs were and what was the harm, the legal harm they were suffering, because there's some law that was harming them, and if you're going to overturn it, you got to have some reason for it. And so anyway, it was just totally off his radar. It wasn't even a topic that he wanted to talk about. So that's an example of what I mean by the Trump thing. It's like when you're talking about the presidency, how can you talk about Trump without talking about the institution of the presidency?
That's right.
And maybe you're too worried about Twitter. Maybe Twitter's not really the issue. It's about other stuff. Twitter's over here. Maybe it does get us a window into his character. Okay.
Yeah.
But it doesn't follow that he's going to be a bad president as a president.
Right. Well, and that's the question. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, that's where I would welcome more institutional dialogue on these things, right? Yeah. What everyone's criticisms of Trump or Biden or Obama, what are they going to do, or what are they doing as president? What are they going to do? What type of justice are they going to appoint?
And compared to the alternative too.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's the thing. And that's why I appreciate, and I've heard you talk on it or write on the Republican professor. It's all fine and dandy to be conservative.
Yeah.
It's all dandy to have certain ideas that you're wedded to, but what's the vehicle to have those ideas shape public policy or shape our institutional life together? And since Lincoln, the Republican Party has been the vehicle for, in my view, doing that well. It hasn't always done it well. It doesn't always do it well. But what other vehicle do you have to do that? And so that's what I appreciate about your approach to things is like, whatever the faults of the Republican Party is, it's the only institution since the 1860s that has fought for what's the core values of our system are, which are rooted in the principles of the Declaration and implemented through the institutions of the Constitution. And for sometimes better than others, the Republican Party has tried to stand for constitutional government. And at least since the early 20th century, the Democratic Party, they fought a war on progressivism. And since the progressive takeover of the Democratic Party, they have sought to undermine or lessen the constraints on constitutional government. And that's what kind of got me, that was my first book was on, it was on Article 5, the amendment process. But the amendment process, what I saw there was it was an institutional process and a constraint on excessive popular will. It was to channel popular will towards changing the Constitution in an orderly manner. And
do you have a copy of your book that you could hold up?
Yeah.
I meant to actually get you a copy before.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Protecting the
Yeah.
Constitution, the case for Article 5, the Article 5 amendment process.
Yeah, I guess
The
it's
name.
reverse.
I got no, I can see it. I can see it the way it
Okay.
is. And I'm reading it for those who are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, wherever you're getting your podcast from. Some people don't watch a lot of people don't watch the YouTube, it turns out. But yeah, so that in other words, you did a book on constitutional law.
Yeah, I was that's what I was drawn to, was constitutional law. And so much has been written there. As you know, it's hard to find a unique thing to say. And as I studied Article 5,
same problem in biblical studies, by the way.
What's that?
That's the same issue that I had in biblical studies.
Yeah.
Is how do you find something new to say? I mean, it's
Right.
it's already been said.
But what struck me is I saw this wave of top scholars at Yale, University, Texas, saying, like, people like Sanford Levinson at Texas saying, oh, the Constitution is like just too constrictive. The amendment process is too specific, and so many things have been done outside the. So anyways, I was drawn to it as, well, no, if we have a written Constitution and we need to alter it, we have a way to alter it. So what does that mean? So I dug into the history of, well, why was it created in the first place? Why have an Article 5? And before I got into that, it's like, then I looked at the attacks on it. And the attacks are, it's too difficult, it's undemocratic, all these arguments that when it boiled down, it was just, it was too constitutional. That's the problem. People don't like the nature of the Constitution. They don't like, and so that drew me into brief discussions of, well, what is law, right? Law, RA means to bind. Law is there to bind us. Well, do we bind it based on the arbitrary will of some other person, or does the law have to have some kind of moral framework that it operates in? And the founders opted for the latter. There has to be a moral framework. Indeed, there is a moral framework that law operates in. And so the Constitution can't just be positive law unlinked from the moral order of the universe. It has to be a law that's reflecting that moral order. And that's where, again, gets into our previous discussion. That's where Martin Luther King's so good, St. Augustine, all these things. That the whole natural law tradition is, there is a law set in nature by God that orders our lives, and our positive law needs to conform with that. And the US Constitution was an attempt to do that. And when you start throwing off the positive law that's in conformity with the natural law, what are you advocating exactly? You're advocating metaphysical chaos. And so anyways, that little Article 5 seems like a technical thing, and I got into technical, but it kept drawing me into these kind of larger vistas of, like, this is really a manifestation of a commitment to law that's rooted in nature, and that nature has a moral order, that it's so anyway.
So the reason it's so hard to change the Constitution then is because, how does that link up to the moral order?
Okay, because if you're going to have a Constitution that's essentially democratic or linked to popular government,
it's the people hiring the government, not the other way. It's not the government subjecting the people.
Yeah, that's right. But the people are not going to get it right all of the time. Well, historically, the people would say, well, people get it wrong all the time. So what we really need is an aristocracy or a monarchy, because the people are too crazy. Well, the American government's like, no, we don't want that. And then in the book, I draw the link between Odysseus he binds himself, if you remember from the Odyssey, he binds himself to the mast so he can hear the sirens, right? Because if he's not bound to the mast, he hears the sirens and he goes off, and he just basically doesn't want to leave the island, and he ends up dying and starving to death. There's all these bones and skulls and so forth because people have done that. So
Odysseus is counseled to put wax in his ears, or no, not to put, the crew puts wax in their ears. He binds himself to the mast so he can hear the siren song, but not give in to its lure. So I kind of draw that analogy out, like democracy is this kind of siren song, but it can draw us towards these unhealthy tendencies. And so we've created a constitutional government that binds us to certain procedures and forms and formalities, so that we can experience democratic government without the excesses of democratic government. But once you start loosening the binds, once you start loosening the Constitution, if you will, then you're giving yourself over to just the popular whim, the excesses of democracy that will lead to our demise. That's the quick analogy of it. But
that's great. That's a great analogy. I love that analogy.
So that's how I draw it to
so the procedures and the norms and the institutions are protecting us from just a brute, passionate majority will that's not rooted in sound judgment.
That's right.
Judgment takes a while to form. Passion is very quick.
That's right.
And it's fickle.
Yeah.
Judgment requires deliberation, and for that to happen, there has to be a process that's protected.
That's right.
And this is the best we can do. There's no other way you can do it, unless you want somebody like a king, a rational king in charge of you, and then you just have to do whatever he says. And if you don't understand it, well, too bad.
That's right.
You got to wear the mask even until you die by yourself, on the highway, when you're walking down the highway, and in Safeway or whatever. I mean, you're going to have these arbitrary dictates that are going to arbitrary to you, at least. And the best situation is if there's law and you understand it.
Yeah.
Like, take the traffic laws that we have, for example. There's nothing magical about 55 miles speed limit, but you can get at the principle, and it shouldn't be arbitrary. The number shouldn't be totally arbitrary. It's going to be arbitrary which number you pick. We tend to like numbers like 55. You never see like a 53 mile an hour.
53 and a half.
Yeah. It is arbitrary when you get down, because you don't know exactly, but the principle, you understand. The principle is don't run the stop sign.
Yeah.
Now I run stop signs occasionally. If there's nobody around, I do not come to a complete stop. And so I do break the law.
Yeah.
But I don't lose any sleep about it at all, because I understand the deeper principle.
Yeah.
And I'm fully aware that I'm responsible for my actions, but the law is also there to help me be responsible for my actions. In other words, to moderate my passions so that I'm not constantly speeding just because I personally am in a hurry. I'm now in the practice of slowing down.
That's right.
Even if nobody's around, I still slow down, because the practice is there. And that's it's similar. It's an analogy, I guess, to Article 5.
Yes.
You got to slow down. You got to think about other people. You got to think about what this is doing.
That's right.
You got to think about, what if you're wrong?
That's right.
Like, what if I am wrong and there's somebody crossing the street and it's too late? And I love that. That's what I love about constitutional law. It's the gift that keeps on giving, as Michael Ullman used to say. Did you ever have him as a professor?
I didn't. He was running the Claremont DC program when I was there. Okay. But I met him on several occasions while I was there, and afterwards, obviously, I had met with him several times. I know he was formative for you and my colleague Scott Waller, and
so I had wonderful conversations with him. But I wish I had been able to take a class with him and kind of like soak it in for an entire semester.
Who is your favorite professor at Claremont?
Whoa, that's hard to pick one. I'll list at least three that off the top of my head. My chair was Ralph Rossum. I don't know if you ever had Ralph Rossum. and Joseph Bassett. They were the two leading, two driving forces of my dissertation on my committee.
I've heard of both of those men.
Okay.
Actually, they were both on my committee too.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, okay. That's.
In fact, I had Ralph Rossum on. He's in the can. He's not posted yet, but
nice. I'll definitely watch that. So those two, Charles Kessler.
I've heard of him too.
I
had him on too. I interviewed him. Yeah. I squeezed almost an hour and a half out of Charles Kessler.
Wow.
He was tough to nail down by email, but
yeah,
if you ever tried, but he's very busy. But
yes.
The only thing that could peel him away from the conversation, and I reached through the screen and I held him. I said, "No, you're not leaving, Charles." He said, "But my students have office hours." And then I said, "Okay, all right. Well, I don't want to deprive any students from time away from you. That's for sure, because our country needs it." So those are the three people on your committee?
No, but the third person on my committee was Jean Strodell.
I've heard of her too. Yeah.
Yes. So, and she
I had her. Yeah.
She was wonderful.
Yeah, she's delightful.
We we didn't agree on politics, but
we had wonderful conversations, and she challenged
Yes.
me to make my dissertation better, and she advocated for me, and so it was. But that's the thing. That's how it should be, and it should be that way in the academy, where you can do good work that you don't always disagree on fundamental things on. And so
yeah, she's old school. She's an old school liberal. She believes in
Yes.
free speech.
That's right.
She's an old guard feminist, it seemed like to me.
That's right. Yeah.
PhD from MIT, scary
Yeah.
smart.
Yeah.
And just a principled lady who she covered for me a few times too.
Yeah.
And probably in ways I don't even understand fully, but yeah,
Well,
she's a delightful
I don't know exactly, but I think I won her over one day early in my first year. One of the more aggressive students went after her on some point, and I stood up for her on that point. And I sensed that there was always a soft spot for me ever since that. I defended her in class on that. I even forget the exact point, but I felt like I kind of
good for you.
Appreciation from that point on.
What was it that got you into politics at right away? Were you a Christian growing up, and then you just thought about politics and you had questions that you needed to answer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was raised in a Christian home. My dad was a big history buff, big history. He loved history, and so that kind of rubbed off. We'd always watch historical movies. We'd watch war movies. If I had questions, and then we'd,
where did you grow up?
Oh, in Rancho Cucamonga, just right up the freeway.
Yeah.
So I grew up there, and so he would say, I'd ask, a question, let's say about the Battle of the Bulge or something. He's like, well, go look it up in the World Book Encyclopedia. So I'd go over there, look up the Battle of the Bulge in the World Book Encyclopedia, or that kind of thing. So I just grew up. So I just had this love and appreciation for history. And then when I got to college at Vanguard University, well, it was SEC back then, but they had a history / poli-sci major. It was a combined major. And so I think that was good because it allowed me to see the connection between history and politics. And my mentor there was a missionary kid from Africa called Dr. McNutt. And he was wonderful. And he was a Claremont grad from the 1960s, I think. And so that kind of got me plugged into like thinking about Claremont. But in undergrad, that's to make the connection between history and politics. And I saw at that point, I was conceiving of politics as applied history. Like in history, you study the politicians who made history. And so I wanted to think more about that. And so that kind of, I started heading down the politics and law thinking route. I spent a semester in Washington, D.C. as an undergrad and loved that experience. And so my plan was to go back to DC and work on Capitol Hill. I had interned on Capitol Hill, and my plan was to go work there for a while. And then that didn't work out. And so I came back, and because my dad had a stroke, so I thought, oh, it's not a good time to be away from home. So I came back to California, was helping out the family. And I thought, well, I knew enough about the policy processes that it's not thoughtful enough. I thought it was too hustle and bustle and too many throwing elbows. I didn't know about Plato's ship of state analogy yet, but that seemed apt when I read it. I'm like, yeah, that was the policy process I saw. So then I started thinking about grad school in Claremont, and so I went that route. And that's how I got that. That's the history politics connection there. But I also thought deeply about law school. I almost went to law school, applied, got accepted, but I thought,
really?
Do I really need a law degree? I don't really want to practice. I'm just intrigued by the intellectual exercise of law.
Yes.
And so the more I thought about it, I'm like, I don't need to spend at that time 90 grand on a law degree when I'm not going to practice. I didn't. But I was intrigued by it. And so my dissertation, as we talked about, and my subsequent book was kind of in that vein, because I was intrigued by law and the role it played in politics. So
I had the same thought to go to law school. I was teaching at Pepperdine at the time, and I rolled into Claremont because my one-time colleague, your current colleague, Scott Waller, also a grad of Talbot's philosophy program, just like I was. So that was a connection for us. But he had, I think the year before, had invited me over to Claremont. So this was in the summer. I think it would have been in 2007. I was teaching ancient and medieval heritage at Pepperdine. I drove 2 hours on a Friday to Claremont and ran into this tall drink of water. This guy, he was the only guy there. Turned out it was Michael Ullman. I didn't know him. It's first time meeting him. He talked to me for probably a good 45 minutes to an hour, maybe. We sat on the couches and just he said, well, what do you plan on doing with your life? What are you doing here? And I said, well, I don't know what I'm doing here. I want to maybe go to law school. I'm thinking about law school. I have a master's in philosophy. I teach philosophy. He said, you don't want to go to law school. He talked me out of law school on that Friday.
Wow.
Changed my life. I didn't know he would be my future professor. I had no idea who he was. I didn't know he used to be Ronald Reagan's basically lawyer in the White House. I didn't know that he used to work for Senator Buckley, which is William F. Buckley's brother, who was he won U.S. Senate seat in New York for the Conservative Party. I didn't know any of this. And I didn't know he was high up in the Justice Department with Antonin Scalia under Ford. I didn't know anything like this. And he said, you need to read A Nation Under Lawyers by Marianne Glendon. I said, well, who's that lady? And he said, she teaches at Harvard Law School. He says, I'm an attorney. Trust me. Actually, you know what? I'm not even sure if he pulled out his attorney. Yes, he did. He said, I'm an attorney. I got an LLB back when and he explained the difference. And so he talked me out of going to law school, and he convinced me, you don't want to do that because they don't teach what you want at law school. It's a technician degree. It's a really expensive technician, and you're an intellectual. You want to know the deeper understanding of the law. So you would have loved him.
I would have loved, and it took me too long to figure that out. Not too long, I figured it out, but I would have really benefited from him saying, look, no, this is what you really want. But it's funny you mentioned Marianne Glendon, the Forum in the Tower. In a couple classes, actually, it looks at Plato, Burke, Rousseau, Locke, Hobbes, and it really gets into their biography and how they thought about and dealt with the forum, the hustle and bustle of everyday politics and what's required to succeed there, and the tower, the ivory tower, the intellectual realm of ideas
And it really looks at and how they successfully or unsuccessfully tried to navigate the Forum and the Tower. And and so Marion Glendon, I try to introduce my students to this work because that's what they're all wrestling with. They're like you, they're drawn to kind of the politics and the power of law. That's, I think, if I was honest, that's what drew me to it. Like law, if you apply the law, you can like gain leverage over people to get them to do things, and it provides structure. And but I was also drawn, like you, to the Tower. Like, but why, and how does it work, and does this tie into like deeper, larger meanings of things? And so yeah, Ullman would have been helpful to me as I was wrestling through those things. I didn't meet him till later, where I committed rightly, as it turns out, to a PhD in politics, studying law rather than a technical law degree.
Yeah.
And into all kinds of lawyers who get the technical law degree who are now like trying to backfill the actual side of things. And so I try to help them with that. But
yeah, it's amazing. The PhD, if you focus on public law, you can get so much stuff that people, attorneys, they don't know, they don't have.
Yeah.
I've had so many attorneys tell me, yeah, we didn't really read the Constitution in law school. We just read what judges said, and we didn't read the actual text of anything. And you know, it's a lot of work too. So you can get kind of bogged down in the details of briefing and trying to be, you know, you got the adversarial skill down, which is, it's an adversarial system. So that can sometimes communicate the wrong message, I think. Like there is no answer.
That's
the
right.
Answer is just who is more powerful.
That's right. Has the best argument. Yeah, no, you're exactly. It's funny because I came to the same, like, the adversarial system is good, but you have to know, again, like you were saying, the purpose of it. The purpose to win, the purpose to get at the truth.
Yeah, that's right.
To foster deliberation in an institutional manner, not to win. And without that overarching nature of why are we doing law? What is the nature of law? Then it does get reduced down to, well, I need to win the case, so I'm going to do whatever I need to do, or I need to be really good at argumentation, or I need to understand what is the judge going to care about, right? So I need to understand all the briefs and so forth, without any kind of understanding of these cases are responding to a constitution. Right. Constitutional law, I'm sure you do too, when you teach it, like, hey, let's start with, what does the Constitution say?
Yeah, it's a written constitution. It's written. It's a written constitution.
Yeah, it's a written constitution.
Yeah, so that means look at the words. Yeah.
Yeah, is it a reasonable application of those words to this set of facts? And then if not, why not? What's going on here? Why do you think it's not a reasonable application? And why, you know? But I think I try to get students to at least start with the text, right? Because you can get in once you accept the precedent, and you're like, that's all we need to look at now. Well, but is that precedent? That's where Thomas is so good on the court. Thomas is never is satisfied with just the precedent. He's like, oh yeah, how does this precedent link to the Constitution's text and to the larger natural law philosophy that informs the Constitution? And that's, I think, on the conservative side, that's the debate that's most interesting to me right now, because there's a vigorous debate going on amongst is about how to tackle that, and how, like, the Thomas approach versus a more like a Rehnquist strict positivism.
Have you read Ralph Rossum's book on Thomas?
No, I'm sad to say I have it, but I have not had. Probably great. I have a stack of books that are on deck.
Yeah, that book.
Yeah, in the batter's box.
I read that book and his Scalia book carefully, and based on the way that transformed me, I started reading those probably back in 2014, whenever I started taking constitutional law. And I realized at that moment, I think I wanted him as my chair for my dissertation, because I was so impressed with how close and careful reading he did, and it looked like a lot of work. He's masterful. When we had him on here, he talked about the 17th Amendment. He's got a book on the 17th Amendment. So it was a real nerd dive and nerd fest on the 17th Amendment. He's a wonderful man. I really enjoy him. But let me ask you this. Are we too far gone for the Constitution to work? I mean, given popular culture, given social media, given our polarized times, given relativism, doesn't the way that the Constitution is set up in the Declaration, doesn't it rely on a religious people that believe in right and wrong and have a shared tradition, or is there a way back? Doesn't this depend on a robust church that's engaged and not just passive? What do you think about that?
Yes, all of what you said is true. Are we too far gone?
That's a question for history, if you will. A lot of the things that were taken for granted by the founding generation and subsequent generations, and even very recent generations, a lot of those things are in decay. And the only way one knows if they're irrevocably in decay is to try to restore them. Lincoln in his day, he talks about in the Lyceum Address, he talks about the founding generation giving them the political edifice of liberty, the institutions. They handed them down to Lincoln's generation, right? And it is our task to pass it on to the next generation, and to resist usurpation and decay, right? And I think that task is still before us, and the task is maybe greater because so much more has decayed and the usurpation has gotten so much bolder. But the only option is abandon the system, and then the question is for what? That's always the question. Restore the system as best we can in our day, and so it might need some modifications, but those modifications need to be resonant with, in consonance with, the principles, the core system that was originally built. And to do that, you need to understand the system as it was originally built. Doesn't mean to be exactly jot and tittle exactly what the founders passed on, but it has to be consonant with the principles that gave life to the system itself. So those are the only system, and the left is pretty open about it. They don't like our system. They haven't liked it for a century, and they've been undermining it. They've been playing on natural decay, and they've been usurping it in various ways. They love the court when it does what they want it to do. They hate the court when it doesn't do what they want to do. We talked about that earlier. That's just raw will. That's all they want. It's just kind of like a spoiled children approach to politics, which again reduces down to power. Or you root the authority in the people through our constitutional system, or you see some people even farther right, I would say, who want just authority rooted in traditional notions of authority that you would have seen in Europe,
right?
Aristocracy, monarchy, or religious authorities. The American system, I think Joff is right about this. The American system found a unique way, preserve authority and public government at the same time. And I have yet to see another way forward on that. And so I'm committed to preservation and restoration.
Now, when you say restoration, you don't mean restoration to slavery. You don't mean restoration to racism and white supremacy. You don't mean that. You mean something, well, going back to the Republican Party, I think you've already mentioned it. Like, we had this, if I say we, the first person plural pronoun, as America, I mean, it's not exactly you and me because I'm not that old, but we Americans had this out. We've had it out before. And the issue of slavery came up. Would you say there was a contradiction with slavery at the initial, or how would you put that?
Yeah, no, it was a contradiction. The founders saw this. I mean, not to a person, but they saw this. They
Mhm.
realized that the principles that all men are created equal were not consistent with human slavery, and they weren't consistent with, and they might not use this term, a Christian metaphysical
No.
reality of the human person. A human person is a thing. You can't reconstruct it. You can't create it, whatever you want. It's a thing rooted in the metaphysical reality of the universe. And that thing has certain rights that attach to it. And the founders knew this, and they did recognize the contradiction. But again, they were prudential. They realized we can't get rid of this thing and form a country at the same time. So we need to be prudent. We need to move forward. And it sadly took the violence of the Civil War to rid us of the Constitution. But yeah, so I'm probably going farther than your question demanded. But
well, it was sad what slavery was. It was sad the violence of slavery.
That's right.
That's
right.
And in a way, Lincoln said this in the second inaugural. He said he had a totally biblical view of how to understand slavery. It's amazing how he just quotes the Bible. He expects everybody to understand what he's saying. He expects everybody to know these quotes. He quotes Jesus. Yeah. And he quotes Jesus in Matthew 18, that Jesus is saying, you deserve the death penalty. If you look at Matthew 18, Jesus says, you deserve the death penalty.
That's right.
For causing a little one to stumble.
That's right.
And Lincoln quotes enough of that so that, like Richard Hayes, the intertextuality, the letters of Paul, echoes of scripture, and the letters of Paul, if you know intertextuality, he's quoting enough of that scripture to call to attention exactly what Jesus is saying in that moment. The moral authority of the Lord of the universe by which we set our dates.
Yeah.
And he's saying, make no mistake about this. This is sin, the kind of sin that deserves the death penalty.
Yeah.
And yet the North is not off the hook either, because we're paying for that. It's a very biblical thing to think that you're paying for the sins.
That's right.
In a communal way. That's a very Old Testament.
Yeah.
And he quotes the Old Testament. And that's the president of the United States talking about the worst thing in American history, slavery.
Well put.
At that time. So when I teach my classes there, I mean, I remember I was getting evaluated. I think it wasn't the dean. It was, who was it? I think it was a colleague of mine sitting in, because I had to get evaluated a lot of times. And I was a little risky bringing this up in ethics class, but I used that example. And I basically started preaching. I was just using Lincoln's second inaugural address. I was trying to show the relevance of the Bible and American politics to a fuller understanding of relativism versus non-relativism, and materialism versus realism, and moral realism, and
the political impacts of those things.
Thank God the colleague that was evaluating me wrote it up, and they were like, you can tell that he has master's degrees in 4 fields, because he was quoting the Hebrew. And anyway, it was great. But Darren, you've had some health challenges. How are you feeling? I know that you look great. A lot of people are praying for you.
Yeah, thank you. No, I feel good. Day to day is, it can vary as whether you're healthy or not. Day to day can vary, right? So
everybody, I want to let you know that I cleared it with Darren that I could ask that question before, as I didn't want to just presume that, we talk about health. I know that's very personal and private, but
no, I appreciate that. No, I mean, 2 years ago, it'll be 3 years this October, I had a stroke, and I was getting ready for class in my restroom. I remember looking into the mirror, and I remember feeling this line. You could draw it right down the center of my body, and everything to the right side was hyper tingly. And I'm like, that's not good. And my wife,
everything to the right side was what again? I'm sorry.
Tingling.
Okay.
Kind of like when your hand falls asleep,
mm-hmm.
or you're,
My screen is messed. There we go. When your hand falls asleep or whatever, it's all tingly. It kind of felt like that. And I remember thinking, that's not good. And somewhere in the recess of mind, I thought, I think that's the sign of a stroke. I don't know where that came from. I don't know if it was a word from the Lord or what. But I thought, like, oh, I should probably go to the doctor today and get that looked at, right? And my wife had just left to run to school real quick. My 2 daughters were asleep in the next room. And within a couple minutes, I thought, this isn't going away. I need to call somebody. So I called my wife and said, hey, you need to come home. And she's like, oh, I'll be right there. I just have to run. I'm like, no, I think I'm having a stroke. So I think I was too like calm for her. And I think I'm having a stroke. And then she started.
Wow.
Then I hang up and then I call 911. And within minutes, but so then I walked out of the restroom, and then by then I was losing the ability to use my arms and legs effectively, and I kind of fell. And thankfully the phone was still near me, and thankfully I wasn't in the hard tile of the restroom. I was on the hardwood floors and clothes and things that are and so I fell, and I just remember, and I was awake through the whole thing, but I had lost the ability to like order my thoughts and order my limbs. And I just remember the paramedics coming in and doing what they do and whisking me off to the emergency room. And thankfully, by the time they got done with what they're doing, my wife had gotten home, and so she was there with my daughters and whatnot. But yeah, I remember the ride. I remember everything. That's just weird. I always thought, probably the extent I thought about it, that you would kind of lose consciousness, or something like that. And but I didn't. I was awake, and whisked me to the hospital. I think looking at the timestamps on my phone, it was maybe 12, 15 minutes from the time the stroke happened to the time I was in the hospital. So that was really quick. It was really a blessing that happened that quickly. And then from there, thankfully there was a doctor, because the early doctor said, well, he's got a bleed. We need to cut open his head and take care of the bleed. And finally they got some other doctor said, no, the bleed's resolving itself. You don't need to cut open his head. And
wow.
From there, it was just starting recovery. And it's been, 3 years of recovery from that. And thankfully, cognitively, I've made kind of a full recovery, other than stamina. Like I just don't have the stamina I used to have, physically or cognitively. But again, that's coming back.
Praise God.
I'm walking relatively normal. I still can't talk with my right hand, but I can peck with my right hand.
So you look like a reporter from the 1950s.
Yes, exactly.
You just need a typewriter.
That's right.
Wow.
So there's still ongoing, it's just little things you take for granted. I was before the stroke, so I can't really hold a pencil well. Like you actually need the sensory feedback in your finger to learn how to know how to hold a pen or pencil correctly. And it's weird because I'll put it in my fingers and it'll just spin out. It just there's really fine, when you hold something, your brain getting these signals of just very fine adjustments.
Right.
I can't yet do that. I'm a little better, but it's those kind of things. So just holding a book or taking notes or typing or those things are still a challenge, but I'm able to teach, and I'm able to read, and I'm able to.
You're able to talk about constitutional law on a podcast.
I'm able to talk. That's right. So I feel like
praise God.
I've said God has spared me for a reason, and
amen.
We never know. It certainly is reinforced. Like we don't know how much time we have here, and I'm not going to waste it anymore.
Amen, brother.
I probably did before. Wasn't always a good use of my time or energy. Now that I have less energy and I don't know how much more time, I'm going to use what I have as best I can. I don't know what else to do.
I feel like I want to pray for you right now.
Please do.
Lord, you see your servant here Darren, and you've brought him so far, his family so far. We ask that you would protect him, that you would restore his health completely. Lord, that you would give him a longevity in his assignment, and that you would help him flourish with his students and his institution. We pray for his students. We ask that each of their lives would be shaped in a positive way as a result of their coming into contact with Darren. And we ask for your protection on that campus, that institution here in California, for the wisdom of its leaders to move forward in a healthy way, and that you would restore anything that is unhealthy on that campus to health. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for that.
Yeah. You got a lot of people praying for you. I know that.
I do know that, and I'm thankful for it, and I really do
feel it, because it's life in general is a battle, and certainly when something like this hits you, it's a battle, physically, psychologically, spiritually. You know, Satan doesn't rest, and he won't rest until the end, and so you got to constantly be on guard for him trying to throw you off course and not stay focused on what God has for you. And so I feel like I'm more attuned to that than I was before. I think I was more complacent, I would say, in a number of ways. And so I feel like it's kind of been a wake-up call in a number of ways. And I'm actually thankful for the wake-up call. And I'm trusting in God's provision for, as you said, restoring my health fully, or to the degree that it can be restored. And thankfully, I continually see that. It's a slow process, but I'm not going to bore you with details about what I wasn't doing a year ago and that I can't do now, and what I wasn't doing 2 months ago that I can do now. And so I'm constantly seeing that.
Praise God.
Process unfold, and I'm thankful, and I'm thankful that I still get to do what I do, and I feel like God put me here to do. And so, and I know there's people who have suffered strokes who haven't had as much recovery as I have, and so
yeah,
I pray for them, and I'm thankful for what God's allowed me to experience, and I so anyways, I just grateful for all, you know, more grateful for the things that I can experience on this side of things, and appreciative of what God's given me: a family, a wife, a career, and just daily being able to wake up and do the things that need to be done, and try to more faithfully serve his kingdom, and just tackle what he's put in front of me, and not try to get beyond myself and get beyond what he has for me. And
that's a good word for all of us. I think we all need that. It's been a trying time for a lot of people. I think a lot of people are discouraged and disoriented, and are not sure of what's the way forward, and how much waiting are we gonna have to do. Seems like we're in a holding pattern, or that we're doing a nosedive, depending. But I'm really happy to hear about your progress.
Thank you. Thanks for
awesome. And I couldn't tell you to have a stroke. I mean, just talking to you, you seem very, very alert, and it seems like your brain is healthy, and so praise God.
As healthy as it ever was, I guess.
So no more smoking pot is what I was getting at.
Yeah.
Oh shoot! I was supposed to stop recording.
I guess
I'll edit that out.
As a child of the 80s, I'm supposed to be embarrassed by the fact that I never did smoke pot. Honestly, I had.
You didn't inhale.
Now it's like a sign of like authenticity or something. Like,
yeah,
dabbled in it, whatever. But I guess I'm not that authentic because I never did. So the Just Say No campaign worked on me.
So you're saying you skipped pot and went right to the heroin, and
that's right.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Trainspotting, but if I ever thought
A
of
long time ago.
dabbling in heroin, that movie,
Oh yeah.
like I was like, oh no.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you.
Do not want any part of that. So
No, thank you. I couldn't understand what they were saying either. I think they were talking some like Scottish or something. They were talking.
yeah, they were
Some-
Scottish.
Yeah.
I think in Northern England there's a Scouse. I don't know. That
Wow.
gets involved, but anyways, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your very valuable time today, Darren. We enjoyed hanging out with you.
Yeah, it was fun just having a conversation about important things. So I appreciate you inviting me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's things in the future that we want to get your take on, we'll have to ask you to come back on and give us your wisdom about it.
I'd be happy to do it. Enjoyed it.
Awesome.
All right.